Hey, welcome back to Crime Time 911. It was an ordinary December day at a Montreal engineering school until it became one of the most heartbreaking moments in Canadian history. On December 6, 1989, a violent act at École Polytechnique left a nation in mourning. What happened that day wasn't random. It was a targeted attack fueled by hate, one that exposed deep-rooted issues around misogyny, gender-based violence, and public safety. This is a story of loss, resilience, and the ongoing call to confront injustice wherever it lives. Marc Lepine was born Gamil Rodrigue Lias Garbi on October 26, 1964, in Montreal, Quebec. His father was an Algerian immigrant, Rachid Lias Garbi, and his mother was a French-Canadian nurse, Monique Lepine. Lepine also had a sister named Nadia, who was born in 1967. Rachid was a non-practicing Muslim, and Monique was a former Catholic nun who rejected organized religion after she left the convent. Lepine was baptized as Catholic, but he was not taught any religion growing up. Monique would describe her son as a confirmed atheist all his life. At the time that Lepine was born, his father Rachid, who was a mutual funds salesman, was traveling in the Caribbean. While Rachid was traveling abroad, Monique would discover that he was having an affair. The family would move often. A lot of Lepine's early childhood was spent in Costa Rica and Puerto Rico, where his dad worked for a Swiss mutual funds company. The family would return to Montreal permanently in 1968. Rachid was a controlling, possessive, and jealous man who was often violent towards his wife and children. He was a misogynist who believed that women were only intended to serve men. Monique was expected to act as her husband's secretary and was slapped if she made any errors. Rachid was very neglectful and abusive towards his children, especially young Lepine. He believed that displaying any tenderness towards his children would be spoiling them. I couldn't even imagine having that sort of mindset where showing any tenderness or affection towards my children was considered spoiling them. I have a hard time wrapping my head around the fact that there are actually people out there who are like this and, treat their kids horribly. It's so sad. In 1970, Rachid would physically abuse Lepine so badly that the marks on his face were still visible a week later. This is when Monique would finally decide to leave. Lepine would live with his mother and his sister after his parents separated. As any child would be, he was afraid of his father, and in the beginning would only see his father during weekly visits, supervised. The visits didn't last long because Rachid ceased all contact with his children not long after the separation. Lepine would never see his father again and would refuse to talk about him with others in the future. Monique would go back to nursing to support her family and would start taking courses to further her career. During this time, the children would live with other families and only see their mother on weekends. Monique would seek help from a psychiatrist in 1976 because she was concerned about her parenting skills and her children. The assessment was that there was nothing wrong with Lepine, who was shy and withdrawn, but it was recommended that his sister Nadia be placed into therapy as she was challenging her mother's authority. Lepine and his sister, who were 12 and 9 at the time, would return to live with their mom in 1976. Monique was now the director of nursing at a hospital in Montreal. Although it would be very difficult not to see your children for 5 days a week, I think that it's so great that Monique was able to enhance her career and become the director of nursing. She was trying to do her best to provide for her children and create a good life for them. And I think, she did a pretty good job. Not many single parents can, further their career and become, quite high up in any company or location that they work in. So I think she did the best she could at the time. And I think she did a pretty good job. In 1977, Monique would move the family into a middle-class suburb of Montreal. Lepine was described as a quiet student who achieved good marks. Although he didn't fit in with a lot of students, He was able to develop a close friendship with one boy. Lapine was going by his Arab name Gamil up until he was 14 years old. His name was legally changed to Mark Lapine after being taunted by students over his Arab name. I try my best to teach my children to accept everyone regardless of their race, color, or background. We are all people and we shouldn't be treating anybody differently because they look different or they have different beliefs or, anything from what we were raised or what we think. I don't have any tolerance for racism or prejudice of any kind. And I think it's very sad that a 14-year-old felt that the need that he needed to change his name because he was being teased by other kids just because of his background. Although he would say that the reason that he changed his name was because he despised his father and wanted to take his mother's name. I'm sure both of these reasons played a role in his changing his name. Lapine suffered from low self-esteem, he didn't communicate, and showed very little emotions. He suffered from chronic acne, and his younger sister Nadia would often publicly humiliate him about it and about the fact that he didn't have a girlfriend. He would often fantasize about his sister's death and even went as far as creating a mock grave for her. I feel like that was a red flag right there, to be honest. I probably would have taken him back to the psychiatrist if I was his mother. Although maybe she didn't know about these fantasies. I don't know when these fantasies apparently had been revealed, but obviously he must have told somebody along the way. He was happy when his sister would be placed in a group home due to her delinquent behavior and substance abuse. Nadia would pass in 1996 due to an OD. Monique wanted a good male role model for her son, so she made arrangements for a big brother. Having a big brother would prove to be a positive for Lapine for 2 years. However, in 1979, the big brother that was assigned to Lapine was detained on suspicions of being a chomo. Lapine and the big brother both denied that any inappropriateness had occurred between them. It really just disgusts me that such bad people use programs such as the Big Brother program to find their victims, programs that are created to help children, and you can't even necessarily trust those that are supposed to be helping the kids. Like it's too bad. It's too bad that there wasn't a way that they could, screen these people better or find a way to weed them out kind of thing. But I guess there really isn't any way unless they've been convicted of it or charged of these crimes in the past. As a teenager, Lapine had owned an air rifle. He used it on pigeons with his friend. He would also develop an interest in World War II and began to admire Adolf Hitler. He would also be quite responsible when it came to chores at home. He would clean and do repairs while his mother was working. In September 1981, when Lapine was 17, he applied to join the Canadian Forces as an office cadet, but he was rejected during his interview process. He told his friends that he was rejected because he had difficulties accepting authority. In 1982, Lapine and his family moved to St. Laurent to be closer to his mother's work and to his new college. He would lose contact with his school friend after he moved. In August, Lapine began a 2-year pre-university course in pure sciences. He ended up failing 2 courses in the first semester, but was able to bring up his grades considerably in the second semester. He had a part-time job at the same hospital that his mother worked at, serving food and doing custodial duties. His colleagues would describe Lapine as nervous, hyperactive, and immature. He developed a crush on one of his coworkers, but he was too shy to act upon his feelings. After a year in college, Lapine would switch over to an electronics technology program. This 3-year technical program was geared more towards immediate employment. He did well in this new program. He was described as being a model student, quiet and hardworking. However, in the fall of 1985, his marks would drop. Then in February 1986, he would stop attending classes altogether without any explanation. Eventually, Lapine would move out of his mother's house into his own apartment and would apply to study engineering at École Polytechnique de Montreal. However, the conditions of his being accepted was that he was to complete 2 compulsory courses, including one in solution chemistry. He never ended up doing this work. It's too bad that he didn't complete any of the courses he was taking. It sounds like he would have really had a bright future if he just would have continued on the path that he was trying to be on at the time. In 1987, Lapine would be fired from his job at the hospital because he displayed aggressive behavior and he disrespected his superiors. This event would be the start of Lapine's downward spiral. He was enraged at being fired, and at the time he described a plan to commit a violent act and then unalive himself. Lapine's friends would describe him as being unpredictable, and he would fly into rages when he was frustrated. In the fall of 1987, Lapine would take 3 courses to complete his college diploma. He received good marks in these courses. In February of 1988, he started a computer programming course at a private college in downtown Montreal. He obtained government student loans to pay for the courses. He moved into a downtown apartment with his old high school friend. In the winter of 1989, he began a night course in solution chemistry, which was a prerequisite for École Polytechnique. Lapine wanted to have a girlfriend, but he was uncomfortable around women. He often bossed women around and showed off his knowledge around them. He expressed to other men that he disliked feminists, career women, and women who were in occupations that were traditionally for males, such as the police force. He said that women should stay in the home taking care of the family. So it looks like despite his mother's efforts and the fact that Lapine had expressed his hatred for his father, he ended up being just like him when it comes to his views on women. In 1989, Lapine applied to École Polytechnique again, but his application was rejected because he was still missing the required courses. In April of 1989, he would meet with an admissions officer at the university and complained about how women were taking over the job market and, as a result, taking away from the men. In August of 1989, Lapine would apply for a firearms acquisition certificate and would receive the permit in mid-October. On November 21st, 1989, he went to a local sporting goods store where he purchased a semi-automatic. On December 2nd, Lapine gave his mother a gift even though her birthday wasn't for several weeks. He also missed paying his rent for December, which was unusual for him as he was always very punctual when it came to paying the rent. On December 6th, Lapine walked into the École Polytechnique. He would go into a second-floor classroom and proceeded to separate the men from the women, then ordered the men to leave. He said he was fighting feminism and used the semi-automatic on the 9 women who remained. He unalived 6 of these women. Lapine would then go to other places in the building, including the cafeteria, corridors, and another classroom, using his weapon on the women he encountered. He would unalive 14 women, injuring 10 women and 4 men before unaliving himself. It said that Lapine was seen at least 7 times around the school between October and December of 1987. So he was clearly planning out his attack during these visits, or maybe, figuring out an escape plan or how he was going to get in, or, whatever. He was clearly planning something because he had no other reason to really be there since his application was already rejected. A 3-page letter would be found in the pocket of Lapine's jacket. Police only allowed portions of the letter to be publicly released. However, the letter would later be leaked in November of 1990 to a journalist and was published in a newspaper called La Presse. In his letter, Lapine claimed political motives, blamed feminists for ruining his life, and expressed an admiration for Denis Lortie, who launched an attack on the National Assembly of Quebec in 1984 for political reasons, unaliving 3 government employees. In the letter, Lapine had listed 19 women that he labeled as radical feminists and were potential targets. A police psychiatrist had interviewed Lapine's family and friends and also had access to his letter, suggested that he might have had a serious personality disorder. Apparently, committing multiple unalivings and then unaliving himself is a characteristic of this disorder. Other psychiatrists thought that Lapine was psychotic, having lost touch with reality as he was trying to erase his memories of a violent and absent father. At the same time, he was unconsciously identifying with a violent manhood that dominates women. Other theories are that Lapine suffered brain damage as a result of the DV he experienced as a child, or just left him to feel victimized as he faced losses and rejections in his later life. So while I understand that in a DV situation as a child or an adult is traumatizing, however, lots of people survive these situations and don't go off committing a massacre as a result, like Lapine did in this situation. Lapine's mother thought that he might have suffered from attachment disorder because of the DV, and maybe he felt a sense of abandonment in his childhood. She also wondered if Lapine had viewed her as a feminist due to her neglect as she pursued her career, and that the massacre might have been an unconscious attempt to get revenge on her as well as his sister's taunts. As always, there are many theories and speculations as to why Lapine committed such a horrific act. The truth has gone with him into the afterlife. I believe that even though his father was absent for a long time, that he had still spent enough time around his dad and seeing the way his father treated his mother, that to make an impact on how Lapine saw women as inferior to men. It's too bad that the first psychiatrist he saw as a child hadn't identified more issues with him. Perhaps this could have been prevented if so. Do you think his father had more influence on him than anyone realized? Do you think he had a mental disorder that caused him to act out in this manner? Please let me know what you think of this case in the comments. Don't forget to follow, like, and share this episode. It helps more people discover these stories and keeps the conversation going. Thanks for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.